right, in a previous video, I talked about the different options that Scott Frost could have to replace his offensive coaching staff, and I kind of talked about the direction that I thought he could go into. What I want to do here is I want to talk about who are those people. So it's one thing to say, hey, he should go this route, but who are the potential coaches that he could end up hiring to be his offensive coordinator? Because I think for Scott Frost to have success at Nebraska, he needs to nail this offensive coordinator job. And so I'm going to take a look at some different options, and these are all realistic options in my opinion. This isn't like, oh, hey, he should go out and get this guy, Bill O'Brien as his offensive coordinator. That's not realistic. Kendall Briles is a name that I've seen people talk about. That's not realistic. Kendall Briles is not going to leave Arkansas, a SEC offensive coordinator job where he's having success, and he's coaching against for a non-play calling head coach, to go to Nebraska and be the offensive coordinator for Scott Frost, who's potentially a lame duck coach that has been an offensive play caller. That's just stuff like that's not going to happen. So each of these guys that I'm going to talk about, I feel is a realistic potential option. And so the first route that we're going to talk about is former head coaches, and that's an area that I think would be a nice fit for Scott Frost, is to bring in someone who has been a head coach before, that has run his own show, and I think that will help Frost in this sense kind of lean on some of their experiences and maybe trust them a little bit more on whatever that may be. And so I think the first name we have to bring up is Mark Helfrich, the former Oregon head coach who was Scott Frost's head coach when Frost was their the offensive coordinator. He was the offensive coordinator under Chip Kelly when Scott Frost was the wide receiver coach. So this brings some familiarity. Now, I'm not a huge fan of this, and it's nothing to do with Mark Helfrich, but I think if Helfrich is the offensive coordinator, I think we're going to run into some of the same issues that we're having this past year. I want to see Scott Frost have some change, go in a new direction, and I think Helfrich is just kind of, in essence, another Matt Lubick. Another name, and this is a name that I've seen some traction on, and that is Tom Herman, the former Texas head coach. I know some Nebraska fans aren't the biggest fans of Texas. I get that. But if we look at Tom Herman, here's a guy that's had success as an offensive coordinator at Iowa State, at Ohio State. When he got his first head coaching job at Houston, he was tremendous there, put them in the discussion for the playoff, and then got the Texas head coaching job. And he wasn't terrible there. He didn't bring Texas back, although some people probably said he did at the time. But he was an offensive innovator and a really good quarterbacks coach. You look at what Ohio State had when he was the offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach compared to when Tim Beck took over, the quarterback play dropped. And I think Herman's a guy that knows how to coach quarterbacks, knows how to coach offense, and he's a guy that can recruit. And he's got ties to Texas. He's got ties to Ohio. I think he can be a really good fit, and he's a guy that, probably wants to be a head coach again. And I think this would be a good opportunity for him to kind of prove and just think what Tom Herman's stock will be if he can come into Nebraska and turn that offense around. He could land another head coaching job once again. And then the final head coach, former head coach, is Dan Mullen, who just got fired at Florida. And I know Florida, his team wasn't very good this year. But here's a guy who is a skilled tactician. Look what he did at Mississippi State. He's an Urban Meyer protege. I mean, running that Urban Meyer, he's a power spread attack. He was a guy that I really wanted Nebraska to hire if they didn't get Frost. And rumor has it, whether you want to believe it or not, he really wanted the Nebraska job and contacted Moose, and they didn't return his calls. So whether you want to believe that or not, I don't know. But I think here's a guy that would do tremendous here. Nebraska, I think he'd fit with what a lot of Frost wants to do with that offense, that power rushing attack. He's coached guys like Dak Prescott, developed him into an NFL quarterback. He had Kyle Trask. He can do a run-heavy game. He can do a pass-heavy game. I think he would be a tremendous offensive coordinator if that's the route he wants to go. All right, a couple if we transition now away from the former head coaches, let's look at some current Power 5 offensive coordinators that I think would be a good fit. And just like I did before, the first one is a name that's circulated out there. It's got some ties, and that's Jake Peetz, who's the LSU offensive coordinator, quarterbacks coach. He's a Nebraska native. He was a long snapper for Nebraska, if you didn't know that. He spent most of his early coaching career in the NFL, was on Jack Del Rio's staffs at the Jacksonville Jaguars and the Raiders. He was with Washington. He had 2 stints at Alabama as an offensive analyst, especially working with quarterbacks. And then he was with the Carolina Panthers under Joe Brady as their quarterbacks coach before going to LSU. And so he's been around a lot of good coaches. And this was his first shot at LSU. And the offense hasn't looked good. Can you really put that on Jake Peetz? There seems to be a lot of issues other than Joe Brady and Joe Burrow. The offense has been terrible under Ed Orgeron, so maybe it's an Orgeron issue, not necessarily who their coordinators are. I don't like this, hey, we have to go get a Nebraska guy, but if we're going to bring in a Nebraska guy to be the offensive coordinator, Peetz is someone who I think is worthy of a look. Being those times around those NFL offenses, being around Joe Brady, I think that will really benefit him in going this route. All right, a couple more options. We do have Rhett Lashley is a guy. He's currently the offensive coordinator at Miami. There's a good chance that he ends up getting fired because Manny Diaz and that staff could possibly be on the outs. And here's a guy that I think would really fit with what we want to do, what they want to do at Nebraska. He's a Gus Malzahn protege. He was his offensive coordinator at Arkansas and at Auburn. He's run his own show at UConn and SMU and now at Miami. So he understands how to use a mobile quarterback. He's done that with De'Aaron King this past year. He did that at Auburn with Nick Marshall. And then at SMU, he had Shane Buechele, who is a drop-back quarterback, and he was able to, have prolific offenses. He's got ties to the South. He's got ties to, the Arkansas area. So I think that recruiting aspect will fit. I think he's a guy that I don't know if he's going to be a head coach someday, but he's one of the top, I think, offensive minds, and especially with what Nebraska wants to do with that run-pass option, I think I'd be ecstatic if he was the offensive coordinator. And one more other name of a current Power 5 offensive coordinator, and that's Warren Rogerio. And I might have butchered the name of that. Here's a guy he's offensive coordinator at Wake Forest. And Dave Claussen's a big name right now in the coaching carousel. He's got Wake Forest. They're probably going to only lose 2 games this year. Had a top 10 ranked at one point, and they run a unique zone type read where they really kind of hold that mesh point real late, and Claussen's won everywhere he's gone, and Rogerio has been with him at Wake Forest, before that at Bowling Green. He was once a Kansas State quarterback coach under Ron Prince for a year, coaching Josh Freeman, and so he's got some local ties potentially, but I think he's another guy. Dave Claussen's the offensive mind, the quarterback's coach, the play caller, I should say. So is Rogerio a guy that's going to be kind of always in that shadow? Does he want to run his own system? And I think with what they've done, it's unique. I think it would fit well here at Nebraska. He's definitely someone I think you need to talk about. All right, another option that I think they should go is going to the lower levels. And I mentioned this before. I wanted Scott Frost to kind of maybe pull the Mike Gundy route. Gundy's been known to go out and get small school guys to bring in and to be his offensive coordinator. Goes and finds these prolific offenses at the lower levels. He's done it with Mark Lilicek, who's went to Ohio State and is now at Boston College. He did that with Dana Holgerson and some of those other guys. He's not afraid to go that route. And so a couple guys from the Group of Five or FCS. The first one is Willie Corn, who's at Coastal Carolina. Now, Willie Corn is a familiar name, at least from me. And then when I did a little bit of research, he was a former Clemson 4-star quarterback recruit, started his career there, started a few games, ended up transferring to North Greenville University in South Carolina. It's a Division II school. And his coach at that time was Jamie Chadwell, who's now the Coastal Carolina head coach. And Willie Corn played for a year under Chadwell and then came on to be his receivers coach. He was a receivers coach at North Greenville, Division II school, and then went up with him to Charleston State, where Chadwell was before he went to Coastal Carolina. And Corn followed him, was his receivers coach just recently. became the quarterback's coach. And if you read with information about Corn, is he helped Chadwell develop their new take on this triple option. If you watch any Coastal Carolina games, they have a modern take on the triple option, and I think that's an offense that would really do well here at Nebraska. You know, as Nebraska fans, we remember the triple option under Tom Osborne and Frank Solich and all that, and this is the new take on it. And I think being at Nebraska with its limitations recruiting and the type of offense that we want to run here in the Big Ten, I think a Coastal Carolina system would be a good fit. Now, where will Jamie Chadwell end up? Will he get a Power 5 job and Willie Corn wants to go with him? Will Willie Corn want to run his own system? And I think that system will work at Nebraska, so why not go out and get one of the guys that's running it? If we dip into the FCS level, what about Greg Stevens at Southeastern Louisiana? That was a team that Nebraska is supposed to play this year, and based off of their stats, they're one of the best offenses in the FCS level. It would have given Nebraska fits, and here's a guy that's ran successful offenses both at Southeastern Louisiana on 2 different occasions and at Eastern Illinois. He's Southeastern Louisiana's got one of the best passing attacks. They're averaging 413 yards per game. Here's a guy that's quarterback's coach, offensive coordinator, very well respected at the FCS level. And I think, you know, if Nebraska's willing to go into that depths, here's a guy that they should definitely target. And then the last guy that I want to talk about is Ryan Carty, who's at Sam Houston State, another offensive coordinator, quarterback's coach. The interesting fact about Carty is one of his first jobs was at New Hampshire, and he was hired there by Chip Kelly, as we know, has a connection to Scott Frost. So maybe those two can kind of meet that way. Coach at New Hampshire, got hired from New Hampshire to be Sam Houston State's offensive coordinator. In 2020, Carty was named the FCS Offensive Coordinator of the Year by Football Scoop. They run a balanced attack. You know, they're 7th in the nation in rushing. I think they're 25th in the nation in passing. So he has a real balanced attack. Sam Houston State is one of the top FCS programs, winning national championships. I think that ability to run that mirrored attack, he's got a good offensive mind. I think that's someone to kind of keep an eye on. So there's lots of good candidates out there that are, I think, realistic options. I think Rhett Lashley would be, or Tom Herman would be my ideal situation. I think if you can get one of those 2 guys to come to Lincoln and run Nebraska's offense, I think it's a home run hire for Scott Frost. And once again, I'm open to the idea of Jake Peets. I like other guys better, but those are some guys that I think we need to keep our eye on. Whoever Scott Frost hires after the Iowa game will be interesting, and I think who he hires will kind of tell you, I think, whether he'll be successful or not in 2021.